How will we transition into a resource-based economy? And this will be really the end of our conversation until we go to the sub. So first I want to play for you this guy who's in Texas. I think he's in Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's he isn't a state chapter coordinator. He's like one of them because Texas is big. There's a guy in Austin, there's a guy in Galveston, there's a guy in Dallas and Houston, and so he did. Now, okay, all the time I'm trying to find out how will we transition, and even Brian had told me that it's not really a realistic question at this point, you know. But the reason I want it talked about and discussed is because it comes up at every meeting. It turns people off. Turned my wife off right away. You know, how are we going to get there? So what this guy does is he talks about the fact, well, first of all, he defines the question. And he talks about the fact that a sort of, under our noses, resource-based economy already does exist. Okay? I found another guy who did a good presentation, but in the end, he just predicted total calamity, and he did like a fictitious history. And then I have something about people knocking building test cities, how you can't, it's got to kind of be all or nothing, because if there's an island, let's say, and all the resources are shared there, the outside world, somehow they're going to poison the well, you know? Okay, so let me go into this. Okay, so this guy goes on and on. It was 50 minutes. I would not subject you to that, so I split them, okay? He first goes and talks about defining the question about how are we going to transition. Then he talks about friends and family and expanding that network. I don't think it's a very strong, but so few people are talking about it, I think it's worth listening to this guy. Let me just try to get us there. Click, click, come on. Yeah, his name is Oscar. What?
This is a really important slide.
Too quiet?
Setting up the problem, the order of inputs. We have to, if we're going to arrive at our solutions together, we have to define what the mathematical setup should be with our inputs, understanding the relationships they have to each other. People ask, you know, how do we transition into a resource-based economy? And I don't think they're qualifying their terms correctly. I think what they really mean to ask is, how do we get from now to those wonderful ideas of sustainability and abundance? And if that's what they're asking, then we need to ask, how do we transition from a monetary-based economy to the Venus Project? And that'd be a more appropriate question. And when people ask, you know, how are we going to get there, it's sort of in a rhetorical fashion, you know, as if they're suggesting that I don't see how we're going to transition there. And if you set up the mathematical equation that way of transitioning from a monetary-based economy to the Venus Project, you're probably right that we can't transition like that, you know, because the monetary-based economy is based on scarcity. How you get more money is if things are more scarce. So you have this
you see why I snipped this
sort
guy
of
up?
goal of bringing you the opposite direction of the Venus Project, which is sustainability. And so when people ask, you know, how we transition there, or they feel that they can't, if that's the mathematical setup, then you're right. We cannot transition directly that way because they are at opposite ends of each other, different goals, and they will be in opposition.
So it's not realistic to flip a switch, and today's world becomes the problem
in a different way. Now, in Zeitgeist moving forward, Peter Joseph points out this wonderful plan on this analogy of a second Earth. Why does he use a second Earth analogy? Well, in a second Earth, no one owns anything, and every resource available is just there for use. We have a wonderful transition on how to transition from a resource-based economy to the Venus Project. So now, if we want to ask an appropriate question, let's finish the mathematical setup. How do we transition from a monetary-based economy to a resource-based economy? Because once we're at a resource-based economy and we have all this wonderful stuff to work with, then we can transition to the Venus Project. And I think this is a more appropriate setup.
And he's right about this. Now, I was always trying to figure out how are we going to transition, and always bothered me that, I mean, Peter Joseph never hems and haws, right? He's always got something to say, but he'd never answered the question fully, you know? Basically, he feels that we all need to change our attitudes and start realizing that a resource-based economy is a real thing that could be, you know, humans need to know about it. People need to know that there is such a thing. And then we can get to this Venus Project world. So instead of me thinking about it this way, from today, flip a switch to on, he's just pointing out that you really need to think about how do you get from money to no money. Okay? Then from there, you can go to the Venus Project. Now he goes on to try to make the point that we already have a resource-based economy in our families.
How do we transition from a resource-based, monetary-based economy to a resource-based economy?
And this is friends and family.
Propose that we have two economies already. We have a huge global monetary-based economy that we interact with the world. And we got a teeny, teeny, tiny resource-based economy that we interact with our friends and family. A very real, but, you know, very small micro economy, a resource-based economy with our friends and family. For example, my daughter, you know, if she asks for a bowl of cereal with milk, you know, I don't charge her for that. And there's no money circulation in between my relationship. By definition of what emergent property is, the human activity between, you know, people, is based on resources. If she asks for a bowl of cereal, I get a bowl, and I get cereal, and I pour the milk, and I hand it to her, based on the resources available. Monetary-based economy hasn't infiltrated that relationship I have, that little sub-micro economy I have with my daughter.
Somebody bought that.
Same thing with my friends and family. You know,
Somebody
I have
paid for that
an SUV that's pretty handy whenever you're moving. You know,
but still, you see his point.
So
He gives his daughter
they call me up, and if I'm available on Saturday to help them move, I'm like, yeah, sure, you know, I don't charge them. Well, that'll be
it's not realistic to say, let's extend our love to the world.
Time.
You know, that's just
I just do it based on the resources available. In this case, my time. If I don't, then I'm like,
the grocery is open for no money because we love the world and want to feed it.
So this is a resource-based economy. You know, it's just interactions with each other based on the resources available, not on money available, like I do with my employers. You know, I'm like, I'm not going to do a damn thing for them unless they pay me for it. So ultimately, I say that we have resource-based economies all over, but we're all separated from each other because we're, you know, in essence, strangers to everybody. And it isn't until you meet friends and stuff like that, you start hooking people up. Like, hey, you're looking for a job? Well, I know a guy who knows a guy who can hook you up with a job.
But basically, what he's saying is
sort of network is
we
what
need
we
to
need
network
to start
with each other. You know, I'm going to help you move if I've got the van and the time.
I propose that we move.
I don't know that it's realistic, right? I mean, we already have systems of networking. We hear about that, like going for a job or whatever, and what is Facebook after all, etc. What he's proposing is that what we do for our friends and family, why can't we grow that into a sort of network in which in our local area, you know, here he is adding more people. Is it too? Maybe you can't see it. It says he's adding. Let me see here. Oh, it doesn't advance because it's a Windows Media Player. Okay. Well, anyway, what he goes on to talk about, I don't think is really.
Question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to share the epiphany I had when I went to Occupy Wall Street. Was actually the society or community that was trying to build and create, and a lot of encampments are like that. You know. When you go there, it's no question of like, well, are you hungry? You know, how much money do you have with feed you? That's not even the issue. You know, you need comfort. You need a sleeping bag, and we have it. It's available for you. You know, if you want to become informed with literature, you know, the People's Library, it's available for you. And these encampments throughout the country are set up and designed just for that, those purposes. You know, only thing they ask is that you take part in the community.
They're beautiful microcosms. I mean,
yeah, so So he's actually on point, and
Yeah.
and I think those, the establishment, major corporations and those who are preventing this society from emerging saw that happening. Yeah, of course, it needed money to acquire these resources, but the whole idea of people just donating things, bringing things, and they setting these up for others to come into. I mean, I've seen people. I'm just standing there alone, and next thing you know, this guy walks up and says, "I just hitchhiked from Washington," and then he says, "Well, come over to the comfort station, give you what you need. You're hungry, you need anything, and you can sleep here." And that was just ongoing. And so he's on point, but it's something in a way preventing that from going. And one of the things that we're doing in science and sustainability is one of the huge projects we're working on is solar technology. We're trying to introduce this into people's homes, to people's lives, and showing, hey, look, you can come off the grid, and you may have to help us with obtaining some of these resources, but once we set it up, it's there, it's yours, and you can have it forever, or for as long as it can last.
People make the argument like, oh, New Jersey's not a good place for solar energy. You're just not a sunny state. But it's the concept of hybrid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you produce electricity, it doesn't. When you produce electricity from a solar panel, it doesn't really power your home. It feeds the grid. The grid is still what's powering your home. But you get credit. They won't give you money, right? Even though you're making electricity, they'll give you credit. And then you don't have an energy bill for months and months and months,
Well, another thing I think about the transition is it's not just, I said it before, it's not just the one size fits all. There's different transition ideas and should be applied in different locations where it's applicable. Like, for instance, if you said solar power, that's fine, you do that. That lowers the cost of dependency on money. Growing your own food, that lowers the dependency on money. All of these different things was applicable. If you do that over time and more people adopt that's the transition. Anywhere, what's ever available, all these great ideas everyone's coming up with, we see them all, apply them where they're applicable, and then as more becomes available and it becomes easy and people learn how to do and sharing ideas, they'll feed themselves. So the transition is going to be like a piece by piece, everyone doing what they can, when they can, however they can.
Somebody's got to get our back, though, because as we do this piece by piece, what's going to happen.
And that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up. Like, I heard about, me and Ben at DSW again, a lot of conversations about this, and he talked about the Knights of Labor, and they were one of the big organizations that really kind of in a way tried to get this kind of going, like a transition or whatever. They had communal homes. They got all the different unions together, and but then this was out in, I think, Pennsylvania or West Virginia, and the coal mining companies, they started seeing their profits go lower and lower. They tried to give back, I think, money or whatever, or like try to give back coal or whatever to the grid or whatever. But then, if I remember this correctly, that being said, you might want to correct me on this one, Mike, but essentially, like, they tried to get this stuff going, but then the coal companies didn't want anything to do with it. So again, another example of technological or whatever suppression. They were in control of it. The 1% were in control of it, smashed it down. So that's the other question that always is probably going to, that I tend to see come up, is how are we eventually, going to surpass, isolate the ones in power, really, or, stuff like that, because that's a big consideration to take into. And, I guess another thing that I wanted to bring up, you bring up different transitions for different people. I think that's what you see with, Occupy has different sort of like a transition phase, and then with the SWA, it's trying to reach to the hardest hit parts of the community, of Trenton, of Newark, of Camden and Philadelphia, and and you see this with Occupy Wall Street, and then there's Occupy the Hood that also tries to address, the issues of people in the hood, people of color, and all that other stuff. So that you're already seeing some of that kind of play out, I think, in a way. Different
as more people become aware that a resource-based economy is a real thing, and it comes, I think we're at the count of 7 million right now, people in the global
7 billion.
Oh yes, no, I don't mean
global. Sorry.
Free stuff for the first 7 billion participants. What I mean is Zeitgeist and its organization. It's the people who know about it and care about it and go to the website. I think they count 7 million. Does anybody know?
I saw 500,000 members maybe a couple months ago or something.
That's a big difference.
But they say a lot of people who are actually involved in it, they never even signed on.
Right.
So,
they just need to know it's a real. So when that goes from 7 million maybe now to 50 million, right, in a country of 300 billion here, right, now maybe some people will start to actually pay attention, and as these transition things happen, it'll be harder for companies to sabotage things. I don't know.
It's a hard, long road, and we're going to have to stay vigilant
It's a process.
vigilant and consistent, and no matter how, you just got to keep on. The goal, to me, the goal is worth it. You just got to keep on.